Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and greetings to our wider audience on the web. Just a quick correction on that slide. I'm actually from SAS in the UK, but that's okay. We have Belgian colleagues here as well with us. Okay. In the current climate of increasing public and shareholder pressures and limited resources, organisations that understand the cost-benefit ratio of sustainability will be the winners of tomorrow. Environmental decisions often require both financial and operational trade-offs. But understanding the value of, say, a tonne of carbon has been very difficult to calculate so far for organisations. The reason behind this is that carbon emissions reporting utilises new data sources and new data collection methods. We believe that there exists an opportunity for ICT to enable emissions reductions within all industries and processes. And I'm going to give you some examples of how we can accomplish this. Number one, we can model the cost and the carbon emissions generated from any activity. Number two, we can begin to identify and communicate dependencies that drive cost and carbon emissions. Number three, we can prioritize and cost justify green investments to demonstrate the impact and the potential short-term, medium-term, and long-term cost savings. And finally, number four, we can ensure that the correct alignment of sustainability objectives meets our strategic goals. Currently, organisations have not adopted technology to provide them with insights into the best methods of reducing carbon emissions. And also the right associations on the course of actions to effectively change in a global community. As a result of this, there have been many projects that have been overfunded or more likely to be underfunded, and emissions reduction goals have not been met. And this has led to much disillusionment. So how can we identify targets that will not be met, but in good time, so that we can do something about them? And also, how can we identify the consequences of missing a target? We at SAS believe that the use of innovative and analytical techniques will help to bridge the technology gap. So I'll come on to my first slide. So what you have here is the value chain. So we have the ability to be able to take data from any data source available to an organisation. And from this, we can then begin to report on an organisation's carbon footprint using a whole host of reporting indices. Now, in the example shown here, I'm looking at the Global Reporting Index. It doesn't have to be the Global Reporting Index. This is an example. It's one of the ones that are most used by a number of organisations, but it can be any index. Dr. Chris Tuppen yesterday presented the Intensity Index in his presentation yesterday afternoon. And I think this is something that we can look at and perhaps encompass within the value chain. Carbon footprint modelling, this aids us in measuring the triple bottom line: environmental, social, and economic. But what it's doing effectively is looking backwards. It's telling you what has happened. Now, that is good up to a point, but the past has already happened, so there's nothing you can do to affect that. All you can seek to do is to establish baselines or starting points to move forward, to measure yourself. Also, you could possibly look at things that have worked well and catalogue them, and things that have worked not so well, and then try and utilise them in the future. But really, you are looking at the past. We believe the real power is looking forwards to look at the reporting indices and project them into the future so we can make proactive decisions. So moving up the value chain, we are now looking at causal relationships. This is a statistical term, but effectively we're looking at carbon levers. So what we're saying here is, can we identify for an organization what are the key carbon levers? To give you an example of a carbon lever, the British Airports Authority, for those of you who don't know, they run a number of the airports in the UK. They were looking at the carbon footprint assessment, and they were working out what was their carbon lever. And what they found was that 68% of the carbon footprint associated to BAA was attributable to the ground fleet, i.e. airplanes on the ground. So clearly, airplanes on the ground is a significant carbon lever for the British Airports Authority. So what we're seeking to do here is to both identify and also to quantify. If we can do this, then we can start projecting this into the future and seeing what the future holds for us. And if the future looks as if we are not going to be able to meet our targets, then we can take action. Continuing up the value chain, we are now looking at scenario building. What we're looking at here is, what are the different things that could happen? Let me give you an example. There may be events that are outside the control of an organization. These may be quite infrequent events, or they might be very rare events, but they are nevertheless events that affect an organization's carbon footprint. As an example of that, we could be looking at the impact of supply disruptions and how that's going to affect the carbon footprint of an organization. Also, we could be looking at the effects of adverse weather conditions and how an organization will have to take up a more environmentally costly transportation alternative method. So we can seek to identify these events. Similarly with causal relationship modeling, we can then quantify their effects and then utilize them as and when they crop up. And by doing so, we are now moving into the scenario building process of what will happen next. We know what has happened, and we have some idea why it's happening, and now we are looking at what will happen next. So as an example of scenario building, we could be looking at something like, what if I decide to send out my weekly KPIs using SMS as opposed to printing out the detailed reports and sending them out to my internal audience? A more realistic example, an organization is looking at raw materials from 2 suppliers. The first supplier is based in China. The relative cost is cheaper, but the carbon footprint is higher. The second supplier is based in Germany. The cost associated with the raw materials is actually higher, but the carbon footprint is lower. So here we have 2 scenarios. So how do we make an informed decision about this? Which one do we choose? So this is all about how to make these effective decisions. Finally, moving up further on the value chain, we are now looking at green strategy. What has happened? Why did it happen? What will happen? And now what is the best that can happen? Given all of my scenarios, what is the best scenario of all of them? So here we are looking to make informed and optimal strategic decisions by looking at the best scenario that would give us the most effective bottom line. But we do this based on information and evidence rather than purely based on an organization's aspirations. For those who are interested in terms of the technology bundle and how we provide this, the first area is all about sustainability reporting. It's looking about collecting data from a variety of data sources. We are agnostic as to where the data comes from, but once we have this data, we seek to bring it together, cleanse it, validate it, consolidate it, transform this data so it's fit for purposes for predictive modeling. From this, we can carry out key performance indicators, and from this, we can start measuring the performance. Moving up the value chain, we are now looking at what I've already spoken about, predictive and causal analysis. Again, these are your carbon levers that are now being utilized within your performance management matrix, your dashboard. We can now start looking at event-based information and start creating scenarios to be able to do carbon footprint modeling, for instance, in greenhouse gas management. And finally, what we're looking at here is the returns, the carbon impact of any given scenario, the risk associated with it, so to define what is the best strategy. Here is just an example of, here you've got the Global Reporting Index in the bottom right-hand corner. It is looking at an organization and the emissions targets against that. It's historical insight. It's looking at the past. So what we're seeking to do is to project this into the future, to see what the future looks like, to understand whether we will meet our targets or whether we will miss them, and what would be the consequence if we miss them. Moving further up, we can start looking at the risk associated with this consequence of missing the target, and then begin to manage this. And finally, we can take all this information, put it onto a performance management dashboard, apply some traffic lights, and understand where we are doing well and where we need to spend some more effort in order to meet our carbon footprint targets. Gives me great pleasure to announce some work that we have carried out with Cisco. This is quite recent, and I was conscious that I would not be able to use the Cisco name due to a press release going out in the very near future. However, I've been given the go-ahead, so I'll share this slide with you. So the ICT case study in this case is actually Cisco. So SAS has been working with Cisco to establish and populate a data model, applying industry-accepted greenhouse gas accounting methodologies, and report this information to the Cisco Leadership Council. The customer has been able to integrate this data from around the world in an automated fashion and help them to determine the most effective path for greenhouse gas management, monitoring, and reduction. In terms of the results and the benefits, Cisco has been able to, A, provide a global framework for sustainability decision support with an established accounting methodology. 2, it's been looking at a new insight into the cost and carbon impacts of decision alternatives. 3, it provides management information for upcoming third-party audits that will provide carbon modeling both by facility and by geography. And finally, there's much more confidence in the forecasts that have been generated and how this will affect future revenue opportunities and operational efficiencies. Now, earlier on, right at the beginning, I talked about how ICTs can help organizations. Well, here is an organization helping itself. I came up with 4 objectives. Number 1, model the cost and associated carbon emissions generated from an activity. Identify and communicate the dependencies that drive the cost and carbon emissions. Prioritize and cost justify green investments and look at their potential impact in terms of short, medium, and long-term cost savings. And finally, ensure the correct alignment of sustainability objectives with strategic goals. So here is an organization doing this in practice. So thank you very much for that, Cisco. I'd just like to finish by saying that talking about some of the wider work that SAS is doing currently. SAS has been involved with many international forums, including the European Union and the World Economic Forum, and is advising a number of governments, including around the world, including Malaysia. SAS has also begun conversations with the European Environmental Agency to help the agency achieve its policy objectives of monitoring, assessing, reporting on the state of Europe's environment. Finally, by way of conclusion, I'd just like to reiterate, we at SAS believe that through the intelligent use of advanced analytics, ICTs can help organizations make informed decisions about their carbon emissions policy that will help to improve the triple bottom line. Thank you.